Alec, Peirce, Vintage Scuba. I was going to say, if you folks have seen any of my sea hunt playlist, you'll know that in the 50s and 60s, double tanks were quite common. In fact, one of the defining features of Mike Nelson, you can always spot Mike Nelson underwater. In the early episodes, he had on a silver suit. Yeah, his wetsuit was silver. A bit of trivia, it was painted. It was a black suit. Before each episode, they actually literally painted it with paint to make it look silver, because he was the good guy, right? Anyway, you also know one of his defining features was he almost always had on double tanks, and they were smaller. They were smaller than a standard 72, but still gave him a lot of extra air. And that's the reason for the title of this particular episode on Vintage Scuba. Double tanks used to be quite common. Yes, up until, I'm going to guess up until the 80s, maybe a little bit later than that. The late 80s, double tanks were quite common. You would open up your scuba catalog or go online. We didn't go online in the 80s. I'll explain why later. Anyway, but open up the catalog and you'd see tanks and regulators and BCs and masts and fins. But in the tank section, you would see 80s and 72s sometimes. And you see twin 80s. They were called twin 80s. Or twin 50s, that's right, two 50 cubic foot tanks joined together, which gave you 100 cubic feet. It was very, very common. It's not nearly so common today, but it still is possible. Absolutely, still possible. Now, you can make twin tanks, two tanks, hence double your air supply, the title and my little catch title to get you watching. You can do that several ways. The most common way, the best way, if I may, is with a manifold. This is called a manifold. And a manifold is actually a factory-produced, very solid device, which is really two valves. There's one valve, went into one tank, another valve went into another tank. I'm going to put a picture on of a set of twin tanks, double tanks. You'll see what I mean. It's pretty simple, really. And so the two tanks were joined together by this manifold. And you put your regulator on. You can see where the reg goes on. There's your standard yoke and O-ring. And when you want to go diving, you put your regulator on and you open the valve. And if you had two 80s, you now have 160 cubic feet. Do I need to do the math? 160 cubic feet. It wasn't perfect. Do I need to explain that twin 80s is twice as heavy and bulky as a single 80? No, so there. However, once you're in the water, it doesn't matter. They don't flop around anymore. They're no heavier. They're more or less negative or positive. This particular manifold is from that era, from the 70s and 80s. You can tell because it has a reserve on it. We don't have reserves anymore. But you still get manifolds, modern ones, without reserve, or these manifolds work just fine. They are standard 3/4 inch O-ring manifolds. One minor practical problem is that most of the manifolds that you might buy, I don't know if you can get these new or not. You have to double check on that. But if you're buying an older one, you have to check on the spacing, the distance between the valves. Many of these were made for twin 72s. They won't work on twin 80s. 72s were, what were they? They're 6 3/4 inches in diameter. Twin 80s are 7 1/4 inches in diameter. So the spacing between here is quite a bit different. But you can get manifolds for 80s as well. So this is one way. If you're having a problem with your air supply, if you're always running out, or if you want to go out and make a 3-hour dive, you can do that. Yeah. Then you can get a manifold and put two tanks together. It's a very simple job. You could do it, or your dive star would be better to do that. Now, if you don't want to go that trouble, taking the tanks apart, taking out the valves, putting in the manifold and everything else, then there's another way you can do it. Yeah, this was quite common too. And I have no idea if this is still available today, but it might be. It's quite possible. You could use one of these. It looks like a manifold in some respects, doesn't it? But it's not a manifold. With this device, it has a yoke right here, just like a regulator yoke, and another regulator yoke over here. So you take your two tanks, right? You've got two, whatever you've got, 280s or 272s, whatever it happens to be, and you turn the valves so they're facing each other, and you put this yoke on this one, right? Against the O-ring, tighten it up, okay. And then you put this yoke on the other one, and you tighten it up, okay. Now your two tanks are connected. So now when you open the two, put your regulator on, then open the two valves, like the sound, open the two valves. It's just like a manifold, right? The other manifold, but it's not, it's a yoke. You didn't have to do anything. No mechanical switching of valves or anything else. It's kind of neat. It yokes the tanks together with their original valves. Now, I haven't explained all the practical problems because now you have to figure out some way of holding these two tanks. An awful lot of backpacks today will still accommodate double bands. So if you decide you want to do this, don't just go and buy a manifold or a yoke before you also check into the availability or the difficulty in getting double bands, a double backpack for your tanks. You have to hold them both, right? Normally it's just one band, one backpack, and so on. So check all that out. But I thought I'd share that with you because I found these in the boxes we were scrounging around. I said, hey, that might be interesting. Maybe some of my vintage diver viewers, some of the vintage diving friends have not seen a double manifold or a double yoke. The yoke in particular, these were not really all that common. There you go. Double your air supply. So you're the air hog in the group. You're the one that always comes up first and wait around in the dive boat for 20 minutes till all your buddies run out of air. Not anymore. Get yourself another tank, yoke it together, and go have fun. Anyway, hope that was interesting. Alec, Peirce, Vintage Scuba. Talk to you again real soon.